here we are, day 3 of this Karen Reed retrial that we've been talking about up in the Boston area. A jury today got to hear from some more key witnesses. There were also text messages read that were sent between Reed and her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, who she's accused of killing. A jury also got to see some documentary film footage that was made after the first trial, where Reed's talking about how much she had to drink the night in question, something the defense has been pushing to try to keep out of the courtroom. Let's bring Misty Marris in on this, the trial attorney, our legal analyst of the day. Always good to see Misty. So, I mean, we know she had a ton to drink. That's never been in question, and she's admitted it. I do think it's interesting. Who do you see has the advantage in a retrial? Is it prosecution or defense, one? And is it affected by the fact that this woman has done a ton of interviews and documentaries between trials?
Yeah, so a second trial, it's always going to be that both sides are going to have insight to the other side's case, right? So obviously the prosecution has tried to plug up some holes in their case. They've tried to tighten the case up a bit. But the defense is really, in this particular case, and we saw it in the opening statements, they've hit some really salient issues. They're going to have an expert testify about whether or not John O'Keefe actually suffered from hypothermia. That's a key issue in the case, Connell. And their expert is expected to testify that he actually died someplace warmer and was moved outside. That fits right into that defense theory. There's also additional DNA testing that's been done. So there are some issues that the defense has really honed in on, which I think they thought were their weaknesses in that first trial. Now,
so their theory, to stop you for a second, is that the guy went in the house, and then these other cops that he knew that were in the house, that they
might have beat him up, or he was attacked by their dog, and in order to cover up, they moved him outside to try and make it look like an accident. That's the defense theory. Prosecutors' perspective, they are at a disadvantage this time around, Connell, and I'll tell you why. They have a terrible witness, Michael Proctor, the lead investigator in this case.
He's been fired already. I mean,
been fired. He wasn't fired at trial 1. Remember that. So circumstances have changed and are even worse now, because he's been fired for his conduct related to this case. So they've
collecting evidence in like a Stop and Shop bag. I mean, the thing was a disaster, but plus the text messages he sent about her. And
crude, unprofessional, and what prosecutors said in trial 1 was, okay, yes, it's unprofessional, but it didn't taint the investigation. But as you got into those messages, and now especially that he's been terminated based on his conduct, it's going to be even more problematic for the prosecution.
A couple things. Number one, tomorrow they're going to go to the scene of the crime where he was found, that home, the Albert home. So the jury's going to go there. So they'll say, I don't know what they'll read into that. Today they were reading some more text, not the Proctor text, but the text between Karen and John, the boyfriend and her, because the idea is that they weren't getting along, and she wanted, that wouldn't be, I guess, to motive. So here's one of the text messages. Karen to John, tell me if you're interested in someone else. I can't think of any other reason that you've been like this, meaning you've been acting like this. And John says, nope, things haven't been great between us for a while. You ever consider that? So just one of many examples. But they, clearly had issues, and the, prosecutions try to set that up. So
it matters because of what the charges are. So prosecutors are seeking murder charges. There were the higher level charges, as well as manslaughter. So when it comes to murder, you have to show intent. And so here, what prosecutors' narrative is that the two had an acrimonious relationship, that she was actually having a flirtation with some of his friends, that there were lots of issues in their romantic relationship, and that led her to run him over that night. Keep in mind, the second piece of this is the vehicular manslaughter charges, which leads exactly to what you were saying. We heard video today from the documentaries that she's spoken in public interviews. Always a bad thing for the defense when you've got a lot of that out there, talking about how much she had to drink that night. We know her blood alcohol level was over the legal limit, and it was likely even higher because it wasn't tested for hours after the incident occurred. So that relates specifically to that manslaughter legal theory, and prosecutors have to kind of toe the line at both in order to, if they don't get murder, they want to be able to get a conviction on the lesser included.
Well, here's another weird thing. So they have a bunch of charges. The top one, obviously, the most serious, is murder. And that was the same charges as we had in the first trial. But apparently the jury in the first trial, now they've come out, Ashley had somebody on last night, they didn't even know they could distinguish between the charges. In other words, that she could have been found not guilty on one and the other. It seemed like they thought maybe that she was guilty of some lesser charge, but they didn't think she was guilty of murder. So, I mean, we have to make sure the jury instructions are right, too, right?
Correct. So this was the basis why the defense actually sought a petition from the Supreme Court to put a pause on this trial until there was a clarification about whether or not the jury unanimously acquitted her on the higher level charges. Because when the jury was hung, the judge said, okay, you're all dismissed. It's a mistrial, but never polled the jury on exactly what charges they were hung on, whether or not it was both or one, or whether there was confusion on that point.
Because murder's tough. You get this woman who clearly had a ton to drink, and maybe if you want to raise reasonable doubt on that, the intent, or whether she knew what she was doing, maybe she doesn't remember, whatever. But whereas the other charges are, less of a burden to prove.
Absolutely. So the potential was there that the jury was unanimous in acquitting her on the higher level charges and hung on manslaughter. So there's a lot going on in this case. That site visit's interesting, though. Yeah,
it'd be interesting that they had the pieces of the taillight were found there. We got to go. But what's the strongest evidence against her, do you think?
The strongest evidence against her, in my view, is the fact that she was intoxicated that night. And the statements that she allegedly made, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. That's going to be a problem.
Then she said, well, she didn't know. Did I hit him? Did I hit him? So, but that's a tough one.
That really fits in that manslaughter theory, Connell.
That is a tough one, especially to that charge. And if you're not going all the way to murder. Thank you, Misty.
Thank you.
See you again soon. Misty Marris. All right.